The arrogant assessment. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Orbital Defense Station Perseus, watching the sleek alien vessels approach through the void. 5 years had passed since humanity's first contact with the Zephyrian Empire. 5 years of careful diplomacy and cautious trade agreements. Now, as she observed the magnificent fleet of crystalline ships cutting through space like silver knives, she wondered if those peaceful days were about to end. The Zephyrians had always been different from what humans expected of alien life. Tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, they moved with the fluid precision of dancers. Their technology was clearly superior to anything humanity possessed, yet they had shown patience with Earth's younger civilization. Until now. Admiral Marcus Webb's voice crackled through the communication system, breaking Sarah's contemplation. All stations. This is command. The Zephyrian delegation is requesting immediate audience with Earth defense leadership. They claim this is a matter of urgent galactic importance. Sarah made her way quickly to the main conference room, where screens displayed the approaching alien fleet. The ships were beautiful in their alien design, but there was something different about their formation this time. Where previous Zephyrian visits had been ceremonial and peaceful, these vessels moved in strict military formation, their weapon systems clearly visible and active. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the station's chief xenobiologist and cultural advisor, was already analyzing the fleet composition when Sarah arrived. "This isn't a diplomatic mission," Elena said without looking up from her data screens. "Look at the ship types. These are military vessels, heavy cruisers and battle frigates. The Zephyrians have never brought this much firepower to our space before." Admiral Webb entered the room, his weathered face grim with concern. "They're demanding to speak with our military leadership specifically, not the diplomats, not the scientists. They want to talk to warriors." He emphasized the last word with obvious distaste. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the lead Zephyrian vessel. Overlord Kethran appeared, his usually serene features now hardened with what humans had learned to recognize as Zephyrian displeasure. Behind him stood several other Zephyrians in elaborate military uniforms, their poses rigid and formal. "Humans of Earth," Kethran began, his melodious voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present in previous communications. "We come before you today not as traders or diplomats, but as representatives of the Galactic Military Council. Recent events have forced us to reassess your species' worthiness to participate in the greater galactic community." Admiral Webb stepped forward. "Overlord Kethran, we welcome any opportunity for dialogue. What events are you referring to?" "The Krillian incident," another Zephyrian replied, stepping into view. This one wore the distinctive armor of a military commander, his presence radiating authority. "I am General Voxtar of the Zephyrian Warhost. 3 months ago, your species encountered the Krillian raiders in the Outer Rim. Your response was disappointing." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Krillian incident had been classified at the highest levels. A small human research vessel had been attacked by pirates from a hostile alien species. The research ship had successfully escaped using evasive maneuvers and clever use of an asteroid field to confuse their pursuers. It had been considered a victory for human ingenuity and piloting skill. The researchers escaped unharmed. Admiral Webb replied carefully, "I would call that a successful outcome." General Voxtar's expression grew cold. "You fled. When faced with inferior opponents, you chose retreat over combat. This has raised serious questions about humanity's courage and military capability." Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "General, with respect, tactical withdrawal in the face of superior numbers is a well-established military strategy. The research vessel was unarmed and outnumbered. Engaging in combat would have been suicide." "Exactly," Voxtar replied, his tone suggesting he had just proven his point. "You prioritize survival over honor. This is not the behavior of a warrior species." The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Sarah exchanged glances with Admiral Webb, both understanding that this conversation was heading in a dangerous direction. Overlord Kethran resumed speaking. The Galactic Council has concerns about admitting species who cannot demonstrate proper military prowess. Combat is the ultimate test of a civilization's strength, courage, and worthiness. It reveals truth in ways that diplomacy and trade cannot. You're suggesting we prove ourselves through violence? Admiral Webb asked, his voice carefully controlled. We are offering you an opportunity, General Voxtar corrected. A formal combat evaluation. You will demonstrate your military capabilities against a controlled opposition. If you prove worthy, humanity will be welcomed as a full member of the galactic community. If not, he let the threat hang unspoken in the air. Sarah felt her anger rising. And if we refuse this evaluation, then humanity will be classified as a protectorate species, Kethran replied smoothly. You will remain confined to your current territory, under the protection and guidance of more advanced civilizations. It is for your own safety, you understand. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Admiral Webb's jaw tightened, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. What exactly would this evaluation entail? General Voxtar smiled, an expression that seemed predatory on his alien features. A simple demonstration. We will establish a controlled combat scenario in the asteroid belt beyond your fourth planet. Your forces will face a limited number of our training vessels. Standard military engagement, weapons set to disable rather than destroy. Your performance will determine your species classification. Dr. Rodriguez leaned toward Admiral Webb and whispered urgently, This is a cultural misunderstanding. For Zephyrians, combat is ritualistic, highly formalized. They don't understand that humans approach warfare differently. Webb nodded slightly, then addressed the Zephyrians. We need time to consider your proposal and prepare our forces. You have 48 Earth hours, Kethran replied. We will await your decision at the edge of your solar system. Do not disappoint us, humans. The galaxy is watching. The transmission ended, leaving the human commanders in heavy silence. Admiral Webb was the first to speak. Thoughts? Sarah shook her head in frustration. They're treating this like some kind of gladiatorial contest. They have no idea what human military doctrine actually involves. That might work in our favor, Dr. Rodriguez said thoughtfully. They're expecting us to fight like they do. Formal, ceremonial, by their rules. What if we don't? Admiral Webb raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we cheat. I'm suggesting we be human, Elena replied. We use our strengths, not theirs. We adapt, we improvise, we survive. That's what makes us human. Over the next 2 days, Earth's military leadership worked frantically to prepare for the evaluation. The consensus was clear. Humanity couldn't match Zephyrian technology in direct combat, but they could demonstrate the ingenuity and adaptability that had allowed humans to thrive on a hostile world. The day of the evaluation arrived with little fanfare. 3 human vessels entered the designated combat zone in the asteroid belt. 2 small frigates and a modified mining ship. Facing them were 3 Zephyrian training vessels, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the distant sunlight. General Voxtar's voice echoed across all communication channels. Human vessels, you will engage our training units in standard combat formation. Demonstrate your tactical capabilities and fighting spirit. Begin when ready. Admiral Webb, commanding the operation from the flagship, smiled grimly. Sarah, execute Plan Terran. What followed was unlike anything the Zephyrians had expected. Instead of forming up in neat battle lines, the human ships scattered in different directions, using the asteroid field as cover. The mining vessel, appearing to flee, actually began seeding the area with detection beacons and improvised mines. The Zephyrian training vessels, programmed for formal engagement, maintained their elegant formation and advanced steadily through the asteroid field. They were magnificent to watch, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. The first surprise came when the fleeing mining vessel suddenly reversed course, using the gravity of a large asteroid to slingshot behind the Zephyrian formation. Its mining lasers, jury-rigged for combat, struck the rear training vessel before it could react. The second surprise came when the asteroids themselves began moving. The human frigates had been using their tractor beams to alter the paths of smaller rocks, creating a chaotic environment that disrupted the Zephyrians' perfect formations. General Voxtar watched in growing confusion as his training vessels struggled to adapt to the constantly changing battlefield. "What are they doing?" he muttered to his staff. "This is not proper combat doctrine." The engagement lasted for nearly 2 hours. The human ships used every advantage they could find or create. Asteroid cover, gravity assists, improvised weapons, and most importantly, unpredictability. They struck from unexpected angles, disappeared into the rock field, and emerged where the Zephyrians least expected them. When the exercise finally ended, all 3 Zephyrian training vessels had been disabled, according to the evaluation parameters. The human ships, while damaged, were all still operational. In the aftermath, General Voxtar contacted the human fleet directly. His voice carried a tone of bewilderment and growing anger. "This was not proper combat. You used deception, environmental manipulation, and dishonorable tactics. This proves our assessment was correct. Humans are unworthy of true military respect." Captain Sarah Chen, now in command of the lead frigate, responded with barely controlled anger. "General, we won. Isn't that what combat is supposed to be about? Combat is about honor, courage, and strength." Voxtar replied coldly. "What you demonstrated was cowardice and trickery. The Galactic Council will not be impressed." "Then perhaps the Galactic Council doesn't understand what real combat is," Sarah shot back. The communication went silent for a long moment. When General Voxtar spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Did you just question the military wisdom of the Galactic Council?" Admiral Webb quickly intervened. "General," Captain Chen spoke in the heat of the moment, "we meant no disrespect. But the damage was done." Overlord Kethran's voice joined the communication, cold and formal. "Humanity has demonstrated not only military inadequacy, but also profound disrespect for galactic authority. This evaluation is concluded. Your species is hereby classified as a potential threat to galactic stability." "What does that mean?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, though her voice suggested she already feared the answer. "It means," General Voxtar replied with satisfaction, "that the Zephyrian Empire will now demonstrate proper combat doctrine. Consider this a practical lesson in the consequences of arrogance." The Zephyrian vessels powered up their weapons systems, and Sarah realized with growing horror that what had begun as a test was about to become a real battle. The aliens had taken their unconventional tactics as an insult rather than innovation, and now humanity was about to pay the price for a cultural misunderstanding that neither side had seen coming. As alarms began blaring across the human fleet, Sarah found herself thinking that sometimes being human meant making enemies out of those who should have been friends. The galaxy was indeed watching, but not in the way anyone had hoped. The lesson in human nature. 3 months had passed since the disastrous evaluation in the asteroid belt, and the Zephyrian Empire had made good on their threat. What began as a cultural misunderstanding had escalated into a full-scale conflict that neither side had truly wanted, but both were now committed to finishing. Captain Sarah Chen floated in the zero gravity of the disabled space station Hermes, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows on the buckled walls around her. Through a shattered viewport, she could see the wreckage of what had once been humanity's proud outer defense line. Twisted metal and frozen atmosphere crystals drifted in the void, silent testimony to the price of underestimating one's opponent. The Zephyrians had initially approached the war with the same formal precision they'd brought to everything else. Their fleets advanced in perfect formation, their tactics textbook examples of military doctrine, their technology vastly superior to anything humanity could field. By all conventional measures, the war should have been over within weeks. It wasn't. Admiral Webb's voice crackled through Sarah's damaged communicator. "Chen, report. What's the status of the Herms? Sarah pushed off from a wall, propelling herself toward the station's command center. The station's dead, Admiral. But the Zephyrians didn't bother to confirm the kill. They left her intact after disabling the main systems. Good. That fits the pattern we've been seeing. They're fighting by their rulebook, not adapting to battlefield realities. Sarah found the station's backup communication array and began working to restore power. Around her, the evidence of Zephyrian military doctrine was everywhere. Clean, precise weapon hits that disabled rather than destroyed. No unnecessary damage to non-military sections. Even in warfare, they maintained their sense of honor and propriety. It was a weakness humanity had learned to exploit. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's voice joined the communication channel. Sarah, we're seeing the same thing across all the outer stations. The Zephyrians are fighting a war by committee, following predetermined strategies regardless of how the situation changes on the ground. Or in space, in our case, Sarah replied, finally restoring power to the communication system. The tactical display flickered to life, showing the current disposition of forces throughout the system. Elena, your analysis of their psychology has been spot on. They genuinely cannot understand why we don't fight the way they expect us to. Over the past 3 months, humanity had been forced to revolutionize their approach to warfare. Conventional tactics were useless against Zephyrian technology, but unconventional tactics seemed to confuse and frustrate their opponents to an almost comical degree. The breakthrough had come during the Battle of Europa Station. Faced with overwhelming Zephyrian forces, the human defenders had done something the aliens couldn't comprehend. They had deliberately destroyed their own facilities rather than let them fall into enemy hands. The Zephyrians, programmed to capture rather than destroy, had been paralyzed by indecision. Admiral, Sarah said, studying the tactical display, I'm seeing something interesting here. The Zephyrian fleet is maintaining perfect formation, even though they're spread across 3 different gravitational fields. They're fighting the environment as much as they're fighting us. Admiral Webb's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. That's Phase 2 of Operation Chaos Theory. How's your EVA suit, Captain? Sarah checked her equipment. Fully charged and ready, sir. Good. Time to give our alien friends another lesson in human adaptability. An hour later, Sarah was drifting through the asteroid belt in her stealth-modified EVA suit, part of a team of 50 human volunteers who had earned the nickname Ghost Soldiers. Their mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution: infiltrate the Zephyrian fleet and cause havoc from within. The Zephyrians, for all their technological superiority, had never conceived of soldiers who would willingly drift through space in nothing but protective suits, using minimal propulsion to avoid detection. Their sensors were designed to detect ships and large objects, not individual humans moving with the orbital mechanics of space debris. Sarah's target was the Zephyrian command vessel Stellar Pride, a magnificent crystalline ship that housed General Voxstar himself. As she approached the ship's hull, she marveled at its alien beauty. The Zephyrians built their vessels like works of art, all flowing lines and organic curves. It was almost a shame that she was about to introduce some very human chaos into their perfect design. Using molecular adhesion patches, Sarah made her way along the hull toward what intelligence had identified as a maintenance access port. The Zephyrians, in their orderly way, had standardized all their ship designs. What worked on one vessel worked on all vessels of the same class. The access port opened to Sarah's human-made override device, another example of the chaotic creativity that seemed to bewilder their opponents. Inside the ship, she found herself in a maintenance corridor that hummed with alien technology. Everything was clean, orderly, and predictable. Sarah smiled grimly and began placing her special packages throughout the ship's infrastructure. They weren't bombs or weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, they were chaos generators, devices that would introduce random variables into the ship's perfect systems. Some would cause minor fluctuations in the artificial gravity. Others would make lights flicker at unpredictable intervals. A few would introduce subtle audio distortions into the communication system. None of it would damage the ship or harm the crew, but all of it would create the kind of unpredictable environment that humans thrived in and Zephyrians struggled with. As Sarah worked, she could hear the ship's crew going about their duties with mechanical precision. Their voices were calm, their movements coordinated, their procedures flawless. They were the perfect military machine, and that was exactly their weakness. 20 minutes later, Sarah was back in space, watching as similar operations took place across the Zephyrian fleet. The ghost soldiers were infiltrating dozens of ships simultaneously, each one carrying their own special brand of controlled chaos. The effects began almost immediately. General Voxtar's voice echoed across the fleet communication channels, and for the first time since the war began, Sarah heard uncertainty in his tone. All units report status. We are experiencing systematic anomalies across multiple ship systems. The responses that came back painted a picture of confusion and frustration. Ships reported minor but persistent malfunctions. Navigation systems flickered. Environmental controls fluctuated randomly. Nothing was broken, but nothing was working perfectly either. For Zephyrians, who had built their entire military doctrine around precision and predictability, it was maddening. Sarah watched through her suit's sensors as the alien fleet's perfect formation began to waver. Ships drifted slightly out of position as their crews struggled with malfunctioning systems. The mathematical precision that had been their strength was crumbling under the assault of random chaos. Phase 3. Admiral Webb's voice whispered through the communication channel. Suddenly, the asteroid belt came alive with human ships. Not the sleek military vessels the Zephyrians expected, but converted mining ships, salvage vessels, and even some modified civilian craft. They emerged from hiding places among the asteroids, their courses erratic and unpredictable. General Voxtar's fleet tried to respond with their traditional tactics, but the chaos generators had disrupted their coordination. Ships that should have moved in perfect harmony now hesitated, double-checked their readings, and questioned their orders. The human ships, meanwhile, fought like they had been born in the asteroid belt. They used gravity wells as weapons, turned space debris into projectiles, and employed tactics that seemed to change from moment to moment. Some ships worked in coordinated groups, others acted as lone wolves. There was no overall pattern, no grand strategy that the Zephyrians could analyze and counter. Sarah found herself in the middle of the battle, her EVA suit's small maneuvering thrusters allowing her to dart between the massive warships like a gnat among giants. She and the other ghost soldiers had become living weapons, boarding enemy vessels, and continuing their campaign of systematic chaos. The turning point came when Sarah infiltrated General Voxtar's command center itself. The Zephyrian general stood at the center of a circular command room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the battle's progress. His usually serene features were twisted with frustration and anger. "This is not warfare," he was saying to his staff. "This is madness. How can we fight an enemy that has no strategy, no order, no predictable patterns?" One of his subordinates, a young officer whose blue skin had paled with stress, replied hesitantly, "General, perhaps we need to adapt our tactics to match theirs." Voxtar turned on the officer with fury. "Adapt? We are Zephyrians. We do not adapt to inferior species. We impose order on chaos, not the reverse." Sarah realized in that moment that she was witnessing the fundamental difference between their species. Humans adapted because they had to. Zephyrians didn't adapt because they believed they shouldn't have to. She quietly placed her final chaos generator in the command room's primary computer core and slipped back into the ventilation system. As she made her way back to the ship's hull, she heard the sounds of increasing confusion behind her. The battle raged for 6 more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Zephyrian fleet, for all its technological superiority, couldn't function effectively in the chaotic environment that human creativity had created. Their ships began withdrawing from the asteroid belt, their perfect formations replaced by defensive clusters. Sarah found herself floating in space again, watching as the alien fleet regrouped at a safe distance. Her communicator crackled with Admiral Webb's voice. "Outstanding work, Captain. All Ghost soldier teams report successful infiltration and deployment. The Zephyrian fleet is requesting a ceasefire." A ceasefire? Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "They're winning, aren't they? Their technology is still superior to ours." "Technology isn't everything." Dr. Rodriguez's voice joined the conversation. "I've been monitoring their communications. They're psychologically exhausted. Fighting us is like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape." Indeed, when General Voxtar contacted the human fleet an hour later, his voice carried a weariness that hadn't been there before. "Admiral Webb," he said formally, "the Zephyrian Empire requests a temporary cessation of hostilities to discuss terms." Admiral Webb appeared on the main communication screen, his expression carefully neutral. "What terms did you have in mind, General?" There was a long pause before Voxtar replied. "We may have misjudged your species' approach to warfare. Your tactics are unlike anything in our military databases." "Our tactics are unlike anything in anyone's military databases," Sarah interjected from her position in space. "That's the point, General. We don't fight by the book because we never had time to write the book." Another pause. Then, surprisingly, General Voxtar laughed. It was a sound full of genuine mirth and perhaps a touch of respect. "Captain Chen, is it? You have given me much to think about. Perhaps combat is not the only measure of a species' worth after all." The ceasefire negotiations took place on a neutral station in the outer system. Sarah found herself sitting across from General Voxtar in a conference room that had been hastily converted for diplomatic use. The Zephyrian general looked different somehow, his rigid military bearing softened by something that might have been humility. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "My species has spent so long being the dominant military power that we forgot combat has many forms." Dr. Rodriguez, serving as the human cultural advisor, leaned forward. "General, what we've learned is that both our species approach conflict from fundamentally different perspectives. You see it as a test of predetermined capabilities. We see it as a problem to be solved." Voxtar nodded slowly. "Your people fight like they are always outnumbered and outgunned." "Because we usually are," Admiral Webb replied with a slight smile. "Humanity developed on a hostile world, surrounded by predators and natural disasters. We learned to survive by being unpredictable, adaptable, and creative. Those aren't military tactics to us. They're survival instincts. And we," Voxtar said thoughtfully, "developed on a world where we were the apex species from the beginning. We learned to impose order because we could. We never needed to adapt because we never had to." Sarah felt a moment of genuine sympathy for the alien general. It must be difficult, having your entire worldview challenged. "Difficult, yes," Voxtar agreed, "but also enlightening. Perhaps the galaxy needs both approaches: order and chaos, structure and creativity, tradition and innovation." The negotiations continued for several days, but the war was effectively over. Both sides had learned something valuable about the other, and more importantly, about themselves. The Zephyrian Empire agreed to grant humanity full membership in the galactic community, not as junior partners, but as equals with their own unique contributions to offer. As Sarah prepared to return to Earth, General Voxtar approached her one final time. "Captain Chen, I have a question that has been troubling me. During the battle, you and your ghost soldiers could have sabotaged our life support systems or caused critical failures that would have killed my crews. Why didn't you?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "Because the goal wasn't to destroy you, General. It was to prove that we belonged. There's a difference between fighting to win and fighting to annihilate." Voxtar's 4 eyes studied her intently. "Your species continues to surprise me. Perhaps that is your greatest strength." As Sarah's transport ship carried her back toward Earth, she reflected on the strange war that had nearly destroyed 2 civilizations through misunderstanding. The Zephyrians had thought they understood combat, but they had only understood their own version of it. Humans had been forced to prove that warfare, like life itself, was about adaptation and survival. In the end, both species had learned that the universe was big enough for different approaches to the same challenges. The galaxy was indeed watching, and what it saw was two very different peoples, finding a way to respect each other's strengths while acknowledging their own limitations. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected when the war began, but it was perhaps the ending that both species needed. Sometimes the best victories were the ones where everyone learned something valuable, even if the lesson came at a higher cost than anyone had wanted to pay.